automatically goes to a conversation about God. So I want to talk about this. So as we ask ourselves the question, does God exist? We ask ourselves that, and the answer I believe obviously is yes. I believe that, and I think that as we think about, how do we know that God exists? How did our ancestors know? As we start to think about and talk about ancient Kemetic theology, I want to dig deeper into this, because digging deeper into that and understanding what the Cushite people believe, digging deeper in that takes us into an area where we're thinking about the existence of God. We're thinking about the reasons why they did what they did. It's hard to study and to look at ancient Kemetic theology and all the things about what the Kemetic people did and how they went about life without understanding their concept of God and digging deeper into that. So I want to dig deeper into this theology because it becomes very significant, and it comes down to the idea of, how do we know that God exists? How did they know that God exists? How do we address that question? And I want to say up front, thank you to those of you who support, and to those who bought my books, or who are subscribed, who are members, or who give super thanks through YouTube here. I very much appreciate it. Or on Facebook, I very much appreciate it. I do want to say, for those who've asked and continue want to know, these are some of the books that I have that are available on Amazon. 10 Things Your Child Should Know About Reading, Writing, and Math, as well as stories about Black history. Now, we'll be coming out with more books and new books very soon, and we'll be sharing that with members first. So I'll be giving that to members first so that you guys can have access to it, those who are paid members before other people. So I very much appreciate all the support that you've given, and just in general, and the love. I appreciate that. So as I think about that, as I talk about that, I appreciate what you've done in general. Let's jump into that whole idea. How do the Kemetic people know that there's a God? How do we talk about it? How do we have so many of the iconography, so many of the pieces of literature, so many of the thoughts with respect to ancient Kemet talks about the relationship between human beings and God, and there being an existence of an after, and there being an existence of things that are beyond what you can see. Because ultimately, when we start to look at this, and we asking ourselves a question, and everybody has to answer that question for themselves: does God exist? We start to think about, we're asking ourselves a question that requires, a knowledge base and a searching for an answer that doesn't completely exist in the material things we might like to talk about, but actually is all around us. So that idea of God existing in nature, God existing in everything that you see, is a beautiful concept to live with, because the Kemetic people, the Cushite people, and many people around the world who had a very close relationship with nature saw it as one and the same. You look at Native American people, look at indigenous people all around the world, you see that the whole idea of us being an extension of what is in nature, us an extension of God, all of it being one and the same, that we're not here to rule and to subjugate and to destroy, but we actually are an extension of our environment and an extension of God. And that becomes a significant way about how you approach it. Because, why on earth are we studying these things? Why on earth do we look at ancient Kemetic philosophy and theology if we don't apply it to ourselves? If it doesn't become a way of life, if it isn't something that moves us and moves our children, right? Because we've had an opportunity for years, hundreds of years now, even thousands of years, to be in a situation where a lot of people have just lost the idea and the concept that God is in them, have lost the idea and the concept of divine. They've lost that idea of their connection with it, or that they're even made in the image of God. A lot of people don't even have that concept. So that what that says to you in terms of what you can do and your altitude and what you do in life is very significant. And as I think about that, I think about God and I think about God's relationship with nature. And as we start to think about, the understanding of God and God's existence, at times, we are thinking about what other people have said about God. What other people have said is the existence of God, or how God should look, or God looking a certain way, or God having like hair, or looking like a certain group of people, and not necessarily looking at the things around us and the expressions that are already there and the intelligence that's already there. And that becomes a problem, especially if you think of God as a person, of a person who doesn't look like you, or God is a man, God is a this color man, God is a man who is in this area of the world. You start to begin to think that God can't possibly be in me. And that's a crazy thing to think about when you think of all of existence and the amazing, mighty things that have come about with respect to existence. So as I think about that, I think about nature. I think about all the ways we look at intelligence around us. And as I start to think about that and jump into that, I think about even just the process of flowers. If we're just looking at flowers and pollination, and we look at just the millions and millions and millions of different types of plants and different plants that are around us all over the world that have the ability and have developed and grown and evolved and adapted in ways without our help, for many, many years, so millions of years, possibly even billions. For millions of years, plants and animals, and in particular plants, have been around and done things without any single human being involved. There's nobody who created plants. There's no man alive, no woman alive who created plants for the whole process. This was a process that took place all on its own. And when you start to look at it, the whole idea and the ability to have either a male part and a female part, and to reproduce yourself, to rejuvenate yourself, and to adapt in ways that's already present in nature. And it's with or without our knowledge. Whether we know about it or we don't know about it, it's still there. And that's God. Whether you acknowledge it or not, it's still going to be there and it's still going to move forward. And when you think about that whole process of rejuvenation, we've talked about our men, we talked about Atum, we talked about Ptah, and the concept of creation, the concept of rejuvenation and renewal, and that moving things forward. You see that so much when it comes to flowers. You see that with plants. And the reason why it also relates to our men with me when it comes to nature and just plants in general is that it's very easy to hide. It's very easy to overlook it. It's very easy to it's so prevalent around us. It's so much a part of our environment. As a matter of fact, if we did not have plants, we would not be able to live on Earth. Society as we know it would stop. Without plants, society as we know it would stop. Without plants and animals, we wouldn't be able to live. Period. With the earth as we know it would be very different. And it's so pervasive, it's so continuous that we almost take it for granted. And that to me is what our men represents. When you think about the hidden and when you think about the things that you cannot necessarily see or you kind of overlook, that's the presence of God. God is so pervasive. God is so consistent, so constant, and so intelligent and so pervasive that sometimes when we look at the specific thing in front of us, ignore it and don't look at it. But the idea and the process of that significance becomes very important. When you think about the rejuvenation that naturally takes place with or without our participation or our knowledge of it, it's remarkable. It's not even just that a flower could, in some cases, pollinate itself, or in some cases can have like a relationship, a cooperative relationship with animals that allows it to pollinate and to rejuvenate and to do things on its own. That's a remarkable thing for it to do. It's also that it adapts in ways that are remarkable. So if you saw something, I remember being someplace on vacation somewhere and I was riding around. My son and I was riding around and we were just driving. We looked and we stopped at a light for a brief second, and there was a lady next to us in the car, and she was like stabbing herself with a pen or a pencil. She was literally just stabbing herself, and it happened so quickly. I'm about to call the police or see if she needs help. That's a really disturbing behavior. But the traffic moved on so far that it went away just very quickly. But the woman was hurting herself. If you see something like that, if you are in nature, if you see animals, you see a person and they're doing self-destructive behavior, you automatically say that person needs help. That's disease. Something's wrong. That's not the natural way things go. As a matter of fact, nature and naturally we seek to preserve ourselves. We seek to help ourselves. We seek to do things that are useful to us. If you have looked at recently, and I want you can take a look, you can even Google it. There was a scientist or a group of scientists or a group of people who observed an orangutan in Indonesia, taking a medicinal plant and applying it to its eye. It was a big, huge sore and a wound on its eye. It was applying a medicinal plant to its eye. And it was a remarkable thing. And they were talking about, it was one of the first times that scientists, people had observed, an animal, an orangutan, applying medicine literally to help itself. This idea of nature without our support, you see, with or without our knowledge, with or without our understanding, it moves forward to self-preservation. It moves forward to having ways that it preserves itself and that it moves itself forward and it produces the next generation. That happens in nature without our knowledge, right? We've just gotten to the point where we've been able to observe it, and our ancestors observe it. We've gotten to the point where we've been able to observe it and to codify it. And people back in the day codified it in different ways. They looked at it, they called it different things, and they got different messages out of it, and they applied it differently. So we look at our science and we'll think our science is better than maybe somebody else's science. But really the science and the knowledge, the set of knowledge that we have right now was built upon what everybody else knew before us. So literally you can't really say that there's something that's completely new under the sun. Literally everything has been built. If you're using something, if you're thinking about something, if you're using a tool, almost everything we've done in the history of mankind something is fed into that. And what we're doing today, we're standing on the ancestors, on the shoulders of our ancestors, as we think about that. And so that whole idea of nature and God and the world and the universe being adaptive with or without with our participation is a significant thing. And as I look right here, you see this is actually an example of a flower. This is a bee orchard. It's a magnificent thing. It's a flower that is adapted literally to look like a bee. Now stop for a second. If we think about, I already mentioned to you that all life on earth would cease. All life on earth would be very much changed and very much different if there were not flowers. It supports everything. It supports almost everything we do, animals in general. All of the support, obviously, for human beings and for everything. And that without our participation, adaptations take place. And this particular flower, which I believe is found in Europe, this particular flower has adapted to actually look like a female bee, look like a bee, and it attracts male bees that come to it thinking that they're going to like procreate, right? And what they do is they get pollen all over them, and they end up taking that pollen to another flower, which then allows that flower to be germinated, that pollen to basically interact with the female portion of the flower. Germination starts and a seed eventually develops. And all of that happens as a result of this adaptation. So you have this cooperative relationship between this flower and the pollinators that are naturally there. And it isn't just bees and it's all kinds of ways that human beings and nature and develop and adapt in ways that we don't even know about. And when you think about that, contrast that with what I was telling you about the lady who was trying to hurt herself, and when you see harm, and you see something that without our participation seeks to preserve itself. The whole process of a flower, the whole process of the flowering being there and the parts of the flower developing, all of that is to produce a new generation, is to produce new seeds so that the following generation can continue to go on. And it's amazing that this happens for millions and millions of years without interruption, right? Unless we try to interrupt it. And even if we tried, we couldn't. And if we tried and disrupted it at all, it would destroy us and destroy all life as we know it. But that idea of self-rejuvenation, self-preservation is intelligent, right? If you saw someone and they were in danger and they avoided danger, let's say a car was coming and they jumped out of the way, you would say, oh, good, that was great that you did that because that's smart. You got out of the way of that coming car. Or somebody tried to hit you and you ducked, you blocked. That was smart because that was about to hit you. If you did something that was self-destructive, you say, well, something's wrong there. That's not right. The whole idea of being able to preserve yourself, of self-preservation, of being able to move forward without anybody else's contradiction, with anybody else's contribution to it is amazing. And that happens naturally. It happens with or without our acknowledgement. And we don't have to make that process start. There's nobody alive. There's no human being that created flowers. This process, the DNA process, the cellular level, the process of adaptation, the process of flowers working together with their environment, working together, that happens all without us. And that is an intelligence, that is an example. And it's one of the ways I believe our ancestors knew and thought about there being a God. I think that they looked at the world around them. I think they looked at everything that was around them. They looked at things that were happening, and they made connections. They made observations. We aren't the only ones in this day and age to observe our world around us. And they observed things and observed it in different ways. And because they maybe came to different solutions, they observed and they realized, in the manner in which, the earth works with the sun, the manner in which, and because you're talking about people who were very, very closely connected with being able to grow food in order to eat. So you would have to be very, very attuned to that. And then to be able to then say, wait a minute, this is happening in a way, this is moving and evolving in a way, which is one of the ideas of Khepera, the idea of revolution and time moving forward without us. This is moving forward in an intelligent way, and they weren't afraid to call that God. And so when I think about that, it's ultimately a question that you have to answer for yourself, whether or not you believe in God. But I think the idea is we start to think about nature and we start to think about the things, the millions and billions and trillions of things, of actions and reactions and interactions that take place without our knowledge and without our support, without our help, that go on anyway to help to preserve life, says that there's something behind it. There's something bigger than us. There's something beyond us. So I just wanted to share that it's an important thing to think about, because I think it connects with the things that we'll be talking about when it comes to ancient Kemet and the Kemetic future and theology as we begin to look forward to it. Is that connection is there, and how do we relate to that? How do we adapt that to our lives? How do we recognize that? How do we allow that to be a science? Really, it's really just observation and learning what's already happened. So I just wanted to share that with you. Please take some time to put anything that you have down in the comments and share your own thoughts with it. How do you know there's a God? How do you think our ancestors looked at the concept of God and were able to correctly identify it? Because there are many, many things, there are many insights that the Kemetic people and the Kushite people have that are truisms. comes. And it's not just in the fanciful and wonderful monuments, it's also in the literature they produce, the writings, and the idea of ma'at, and the idea of truth, the idea of doing right for your brother, the idea of putting God first, the idea of respecting nature. The idea that if you do these things, you are blessed, that God and the pleasing of God works with how you treat other people, and not just how you treat yourself, and if you're selfish. All these things came forth in Kemetic literature that I want to talk about and talk more about it. But I'd like to see what your thoughts are as we kind of move forward. So I thank you so much for listening. God bless you.